Calliope's Tale by FalcomReynolds. Chapter 12. Enemy of My Enemy. Denzil was just as polite to Calliope as he was to any other pirate, which made her swell with pride. Additionally, he understood Ianthe's desire to keep her existence a secret. "Yes, I can see why some here would take issue with her presence," he mused, crouched on the dock next to Ianthe. "Sirens have killed before, and they will again." "I will not allow her to be harmed, but I cannot control what others do past a point," Ianthe said. Denzil nodded. "Right," he said. "Calliope, I do have a question. If you killed the serpent, how useful do you think you would be in open combat with an enemy fleet?" "Probably not very," Calliope answered with a shrug. "The serpent was just one monster. Alizarin is a horrible little man with a whole bunch of ships. I'm not really sure what I could do against those. What are you planning to do?" There was a moment of silence. "We're not entirely certain yet," Denzil said carefully. "Our plan is to find him first, judge the size of his fleet, and rely on Captain Zidane's military experience to plan a battle that will go in our favor." "Well, I'll be there, but I won't be useful." "In that case, keep yourself safe, and if you see an opportunity, take it." Denzil stood and turned to Ianthe. "You have a powerful ally," he said, with a faint smile. "Keep us safe." "She keeps us safe half the time," Ianthe replied dryly, shaking her head. "But I will do my best, as I always have." The collective fleet sailed out several days later. Ships damaged in the storm still weren't up to full capacity, but they had to track Alizarin down before he found a way to secrete himself from their wrath. "He is still subject to the winds of the world, even with his summoned storms," Ianthe had told Calliope before they set out. "We will follow where the wind would have taken him." There were several pirates, and even some crowned sailors, who had the ability to see through birds' eyes and use their wings. Calliope often saw their birds: petrels, terns, pelicans, and in one case an albatross, skimming the waves ahead of the fleet, or soaring out miles ahead and disappearing for hours before returning to their masters. Calliope swam near or under the midnight sun at all times, which was odd. She couldn't surface and call out to the crew, and had to hide in the shadow of the ship to come up for air. Not that she needed to come up often. At her size, much larger than the great white sharks that sometimes followed ships for food, she could hold her breath for over 2 hours, and she could dive deep, slowing her heartbeat to press into the depths. Not too far, though. In the open ocean, no one went too far down. That was not her realm. Not yet, and perhaps not ever. That's where the matriarchs lived. Calliope stayed near the surface. The fleet sailed for 2 weeks, spreading out in vast lines to follow Alizarin's trail. They tried to track the ghost of his ship through the sea. They tried to follow imprints of his presence left from his passage, impressed in time. It was the only way to find him, the only way he couldn't erase with his ghosts. And they did find him. After 3 anxious weeks of searching, the albatross returned, and its master reported to her captain that the bird had spotted the ships in the horizon. And no small convoy either. A fleet was gathered, one that rivaled the size of the collective. "How?" Ianthe demanded, when news was passed on to the midnight sun. "How could he have gathered these ships? From where? There are none upon this sea who would go against the sisters and the gods but him." Calliope slipped down and dove, heading in the direction the albatross had come from. It was west, and she followed the sunset until she saw the specks of ships on the horizon. Then she took a breath and dove, and as she went down she hummed to herself, singing in her mind and ensuring that, to anyone not looking closely, she appeared to be nothing more than an exceptionally large shark. She drew closer. The ships she saw were anchored, waiting. They were ready. They knew that the fleet was coming. This wasn't a chase. It was a standoff now. Calliope pressed her lips together and narrowed her black eyes, swimming closer to the ships. Night was good cover for her. She could see in the darkness and needed the shadows, for though she could disguise herself, it was becoming harder to do so with her massive size. She was larger than all but the great whale sharks, and pretending to be one of those would be rather suspicious. Perhaps she could... Something caught her attention, cutting her thoughts short. The ships. There was something wrong with them. Something off. She'd never felt this particular strangeness before, not even amongst the boats of Bruni Hacker. Never. The heretic sat at the front of the fleet, prow pointed eastward. Calliope gave it a wide berth. She was no Ianthe, but even she could sense the chained spirits swarming around the hull. The ships behind it were ordinary ships, but she could feel the spirits around them too. She dove deeper, trying not to cause too much disturbance in the water, swirling around the anchor chains that trailed down into the black oceans. Further back into the fleet, that strange, unnerving sense grew stronger. She felt it like a faint pulsing against her skin, like sound waves from a whale when it belted song at volumes lower than humans could hear. She powered forwards, ignoring her discomfort. There lay a ship that radiated that disgusting feeling. She drifted closer, stilling herself, trying to stay unnoticed. She could sense spirits around this one, and they weren't looking outwards. They were focusing on the ship itself and its inhabitants. Why? As she floated upwards, she glanced over the hull and nearly lost her breath right there. The wood was ancient and rotted away, pockmarked with the skeletons of barnacles and coated with sand and silt that, despite being battered by the water, had worked its way into the grain of the wood and remained there. In several places the hull had been torn open, and the hold was partially flooded. Why was no one panicking? Calliope stared upwards, uncertainty raising her heartbeat. She fought it down and lashed her tail once, propelling herself upwards, and broke the surface. The ship above her was dead. She could see the scraps of sail hanging from the mast, the dangling fragments of rope that was once rigging. In the light of the few lanterns on the board, she could see that there were chunks of coral and deep-sea shells still fastened onto the metal grating in the deck and the wooden planks. And she could spot where the door to the navigator's station had been ripped partially off its hinges and hung askew. Her gaze drifted up. The sail hung uselessly, but she could see faint flickers of movement in the air, the billowing of some ghostly canvas in a non-existent wind. She looked down again as something lurched across the deck, some humanoid form, hunched over, limping unevenly as it dragged one crippled leg over the sodden, splintered planks. Calliope spun. Around her, that same horrible sensation radiated from most of the ships in the fleet, and now she could see the shipwrecks that Alizarin had torn from the seabed and brought into his service. She could see the forms of what were once people manning these ships still moving about, repeating pointless actions like coiling rope or pulling rigging that no longer existed. Horrified, she moved back. This was wrong. This was wrong. She took another breath and tasted the seafloor on her tongue. That wasn't supposed to be here, up here in the air. She dove and fled back towards the collective fleet. When she arrived, she knocked on the Midnight Sun's hull until someone came and peered over the edge. "Get me Callo," Calliope hissed, trying to stay quiet in the dark. They vanished for a few seconds, and she bobbed in the water, casting occasional terrified glances back east. The words beat in her head like her thudding heart. Wrong. 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 Bukullo stuck his head out a porthole halfway down the hull. "What is it?" he asked. Calliope's attention snapped upwards. She placed her palms on the wood of the hull. The clean, whole wood, solid, sturdy, whole, alive, and beat her tail against the water again, pushing herself upwards, as if that would help him hear her. "The fleet," she gasped out, voice raised just a bit so he could hear her over the slap of the water against the ship. "Alizarin's fleet. I don't know how he did it. I don't understand it. The ships are dead. Maybe he just took a bunch with him from Bruni Hacker? I'm not sure, but they're dead." "What?" "The ships are dead. They're all rotted with holes through them, and the people on them aren't people anymore. And they're covered in sand and dirt and silt, and that's how he got them, I bet. He picked them right up off the seafloor." She swallowed. "I didn't know he could do that." "Neither did I, nor anyone," Bukullo muttered, brow furrowed. This changes things, though. Calliope looked back towards the west, towards the fleet. Calm down. You're with everyone. You can go against this, and they'll be with you. You have little to fear. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs entirely, and let it out. Can we fight that? We'll have to find out. Calliope lurked just at the waterline against the side of the Queen's Bounty, eavesdropping on the captains as they met. The size of this fleet is an unexpected development, Kiara Zedane told the other two. We can't get any counts. My Petra scout was killed when it got near. But it's a significant number. Too many to simply surround and bombard. She spoke so casually of the petrel, a small, dusky gray seabird with little tubes at the base of its beak and shiny dark eyes, intelligent and charming. But Calliope had seen and heard the commotion surrounding that matter. One of the gifted sailors who could see through a creature's eyes had been using his petrel to scout a lizard's fleet when he leapt up and began screaming, viciously fighting against any who got near him, staring with unseeing eyes at something only he could see. Calliope had been startled and honestly a little frightened by his outburst. He had stumbled across the ship's deck, babbling nonsense words, and a few terrifyingly clear phrases. Fly! He screamed. Fly! Smoke! No! No! He's taken my bird! He's taken my eyes! He's taken my eyes! There had been a pause, then a wordless howl of agony, and then he dropped dead on the deck. None of the scouts were allowed to draw close now. If I may, Captain Denzel said quietly, I have received information that Alizarin's fleet is rather unusual. Yes, it is, Kiara snapped. Now, no, Denzel interrupted. This is important. His fleet includes sunken ships. They will not be defeated by ordinary means. There was a heavy pause. I beg your pardon, Kiara laughed, the kind of disbelieving, stunned laughter of someone who couldn't quite grasp what they had just been told. He has stolen ships from the seabed and forced them to fight for him. That is not within his power to do. A swift thud. Kiara slammed her hand on the table. Ships have spirits too, Sun Yang said quietly. So it is. He has enslaved them to his will. Another long silence. Calliope pressed one hand against the hull of the ship to steady herself. How do you know this? Kiara suddenly demanded, suspicion turning her words sharp. If our scouts couldn't get close. Have you considered, Denzel said calmly, with a hint of a smile in his voice, that our scouts may be more used to these sorts of endeavors than yours? Calliope could hear the indignation in Kiara's affronted silence and smiled to herself. Of course the information had really come from her, but Denzel wasn't wrong. The pirate scouts were used to sneaking around the fleets, crown fleets specifically. It was a subtle dig at Kiara herself, but almost a friendly one. Well, Kiara finally muttered, I must admit I have not fought dead ships before. Then you are in good company, Sun Yang said cheerfully, for neither have we. The plan will not change. I assume dead ships can die again. Cannonballs will not work on these, Denzel said. They were described to me as impossibly afloat, filled with holes and seawater, but existing nonetheless. I doubt that knocking more holes in their hull will do much to wound them. What about their crews? Equally unfeeling. Your scouts certainly did get quite a lot of detail. There was the suspicion again, creeping around the corners of Kiara's words. Unfortunately, that is the extent of the information they were able to gather. To go closer would have been to draw attention and endanger them. This was technically true, but the edge and ice through Denzel's voice told Calliope that this wasn't about her. It was about the petrol scout. She understood Denzel's disgust. Pirates were close-knit groups, Crews that were ready to fight and die for each other. Crews where everyone had a place and a job, and no one went unused. Kiera's treatment of her scout as disposable was atrocious behavior, repulsive to the other captains. A shame? Kiera sounded dispassionate and disappointed all at once. Calliope cupped her hands around her ears, trying to catch the sound drifting out through the ship's porthole. But I am certain still that a ship with no hull will be unable to float. If these are as old as you say, they should be easy enough to destroy. Respectfully, Captain Zidane, I don't think that's possible, Sun Yang said. Kiera took a quick breath to retort and held it for a moment before exhaling slowly. What do you suggest? She asked, finally, and her voice was carefully controlled and calm. Alizarin controls these ships. Remove him, or even just sufficiently disrupt him, and his control will fail. This is fairly simple. We must focus on the heretic. He will be sequestered behind his cannon fodder, Denzel pointed out. Unless we break through the sunken line, we cannot possibly reach the heretic to board him and fight him. And I'm not. There was a low laugh from Kiera, which stopped Denzel mid-sentence. Tell me, Captain Halice, she began, and Calliope could hear the triumph in her voice. What is your ship designed to do? There was a slight pause. The curse is designed for ice, not enemies, Denzel finally spluttered, clearly taken aback by this suggestion. So make it ice, Sun Yang's voice again, tinged with a curl of a smile. I'm starting to like this plan. Immobilize the ships, break through, and fire on the heretic, Kiera said. There's only so much ocean I can affect, Denzel protested. I cannot stop Alizarin's fleet with my power alone. Keep your ship and your unit handy, and we'll handle the excess and distract the fleet by flanking both sides while you spearhead the middle. They went on at length about fleet maneuvers and military tactics, and Calliope grew bored. She went and picked barnacles off various ships to eat, and waited for the meeting to end. It did after several hours, and she waited as Denzel stepped across the boarding walkway onto the curse and the Bounty moved away. Excuse me, she called up, when she was certain nobody else could hear her. Denzel glanced around, then leaned on the railing and looked down into the water to where Calliope bobbed in the swell. Ah, Calliope. We're going to be in danger tomorrow. I won't deny that. I'll protect my crew above all else. I understand. I have no authority over you. Calliope smiled. She liked Denzel. If they don't need me, what should I do? Denzel cocked his head to the side for a moment, considering. Don't venture too close to the curse, but stay within earshot. We may need you in an emergency, but I don't want you caught in the ice. He knew she'd been listening, of course. He knew she was aware of their plans. Got it. Calliope submerged, cutting off further conversation, and flicked her tail once, sending a wave into the side of the curse as she did so. The ironclad did not move. She would stay with the midnight sun unless she was needed elsewhere, and even then the sun still took priority over all the other ships. The sun was her home. Her family was on board. She would protect her family.